everyone, I'm Stranger staff writer Jasmyne Keimig, and welcome to the Strangers Film Club, a bi-weekly series where Charles Mudede, my colleague, give him a wave, Charles, where we dissect a film for your viewing pleasure. This week, for our fifth and final film for the series, we chose 1982 film Losing Ground, directed by Kathleen Collins, starring Sarah Scott and Bill Gunn as Sarah and Victor, a married couple whose marriage begins to fall apart as they start, exploring different ideas of ecstasy.
I wanted to ask you, you picked it as the one to be the last film, and I wanted to know, why did you choose this as the one that we closed our series with?
Yeah, I first watched Losing Ground for a series that I do with Chase Burns called Unstreamable, and the film is now streaming, but I was super blown away by it. I hadn't seen it until last year, and I thought that the whole kind of premise and narrative was something that I had not really seen before in Black cinema, where there was a very academic, very smart woman Black woman who was really rooted in logic and kind of academia and linear ways of thinking, with her dreamy painter husband, who has these kind of big emotional kind of connections to his work and to love. And I thought that it was a really fun and interesting and different exploration of art, of love, of marriage. And I think, of course, I was kind of drawn to the tragedy behind the film, where, it was lost for almost, I think, over 30 years, because Kathleen Collins, the director, and she was the first African-American woman to direct a feature-length film since the 20s. She died before the film could get mass distribution. So I think until like 2015, nobody had really seen this film. And I kind of, in the past 5 or 6 years, there's been a really big push to kind of get this film into people's hands to see. And I thought that this would be a really great platform for us to kind of talk about, the humor within the film, the art within the film, but also just how this really stands out as something really different within, the film canon and also within like Black cinema.
Too representational.
What do you mean?
Too easy.
You mean to paint people and things as a cop-out?
I never put it that way. I just feel that abstract work is pure, that's all. In a painterly sense, it deals more with simpler truths like color, form, space.
And people and things are dishonest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the sense of Black cinema, the film is not really about Blackness at all. The film is really about the marriage and the state of the marriage, right? And you have this philosophy professor, right? Essentially, that's what she does. She opens.
I was gonna say, is she the first Black female philosophy professor in film? She was the first one that I think I've seen.
No, I've never seen anything open. I've never seen a film open with a Black woman lecturing a class about French existentialism.
Where are they supposed to be in No Exit?
Well, they're in a room with no windows or mirrors. The door is locked, and they must endure each other's company without relief or privacy.
And it's hard to find since it's hell.
It seems a plausible definition to me.
She has a husband. She lives this cosmopolitan life, right? Right, as a professor, and a husband who's an artist. And I think that he's not a very good artist, personally. I think this is the hidden element of the story, is that the film to me takes a really profound turn when she meets another man, who is
played by Jones.
Huh?
black. He the other man that she meets is played by Dwayne Jones, who was in Ganja and Hess. Also directed by Bill Gunn, who stars her husband.
Yes.
He's kind of like a big icon, I feel like, of black indie cinema. So it's kind of exciting to see him in it. But sorry, continue.
So yeah, but he's her intellectual equal, not her husband.
Right.
That's made very clear that her husband has nothing on him, right? In terms of like, by the discussion they have about this sort of like this theological realm, these theological questions, these questions of morality and so on and so on, and they have this, to me, this rich exchange that establishes that they are on similar footing.
Why are you reading with such concentration?
I'm doing research for a paper on aesthetic experience.
From a theological perspective, no doubt.
No, though I'm using religious ecstasy as a point of departure.
Whose? St. Thomas Aquinas with his irrational repression of the experience?
Or St. Teresa, who was a truly remarkable woman?
Or we can go back a little further to the deviant Gnostics, who were really pre-Christian in their thinking. Man in more intuitive harmony with the divine, etc., etc.
Right.
And so the husband starts to look sillier and sillier, the artist husband, who's middle-aged and chasing this young porter. I mean, to me, it really starts to look like, oh my God, this is not.
Yeah. It also kind of gets into, the differences between the African-American community and the Puerto Rican community.
Yes, that's right, yes.
And there's this kind of discussion where I think between Sarah and Victor, where like Sarah is really trying to draw a line in the sand and say, Puerto Ricans, they live a lot differently than Black Americans do.
Yeah, right? Yeah,
and I think part of his fascination with Celia, this beautiful woman, is, how she speaks and the way that she dances and moves, and he's sort of like, in a superficial way, really attracted to her and latches onto her as a type of muse. So there's a lot of talk in the movie about, ecstasy, whether it's like private ecstasy, and Sarah is writing an essay on private ecstasy. And so I don't know, what does that kind of mean to you within the film?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that with her husband, who has a very sort of like simple notion of ecstasy, right? Very simple. Whereas she has this highly developed notion of it, like completely like has thought it through, has turned it upside down, has researched it, right? Can articulate it directly, right? And unfold all of its complexities. Whereas the husband can only say, "Can I paint you?"
Yeah.
I mean, and you realize that, you can't tell what is, is this the art speaking, really? I actually think that he does a great job of really diminishing the value of his character. I think that I can tell that he's because it's this whole thing where the scene with him with a Spanish or a Latino maybe artist.
Oh, his mentor.
His mentor, and it's clear that he's not of that caliber. He lacks the gravity. He lacks the that depth.
You just paint like a child. I envy that a little. No matter how abstract, I still have landscape references.
So you admit that?
It's in the underpainting. That's why I try and hide.
Right?
Yeah.
What happens in the film? What's the first thing that happens? I mean, of course, he's an alcoholic. Everything predictable, right?
Right.
And even she eventually gets to that point where it's so predictable, right? The drinking, the looking at beautiful women and trying to make it an aesthetic justification or something like that, right? You know what I mean? And all this sort of stuff. And so what is he, when he first there, he says, "I have a great show." And he's like, he has to serve him wine to make him feel good.
Right.
And it's just like, and she doesn't, and how do we open with her? he is in the battlefield of an intellectual theory. I mean, he's just there standing at the lectern, like, working things out with her students. You know what I mean?
And they love her. They love her. Like,
completely enchanted. Yeah, they're
right.
completely involved and drawn into this life of the mind that she represents. And it's interesting for so often. I mean, it's rare for a Black man to be represented as a person who is who lives the life of the mind, and it's common for a white man to be represented that way. Those are the films by what's his name, that guy who did The Squid and the Whale.
Oh, Noah Baumbach.
Well, can't stand. Holy crap, I hate his films. I mean, really, I'd rather watch Woody Allen than any one of his films ever again. Anyway, seriously, I always think he's just like, oh, God,
no, I
absolutely insufferable. But his films always like, that's what he does. That's his bread and butter, right? And everybody accepts it. They sort of like say that's the kind of film where the white guy is always tied up doing the smart stuff and has all of these problems and whatever. But here you have how often do you find a Black woman living the life of the mind and in the movie acting in as if we live in a world where there's lots of Black women who live the life of the mind? It's not even taken or discussed that she is exceptional.
I still enjoyed the course. It's mostly you, I guess. You're so bright and lively. Real inspiration. Cool. Thank you. And lucky with a husband and all. A husband? What?
And I think kind of going back to your point about kind of pointing out that Victor is sort of a deadbeat artist. I think I kind of love the fact that it's like 1981, 1982. And he's still doing abstract expressionism, right? Like he's living in New York at a time when, street art is really big, a lot of pop art, a lot of photography, like Barbara Kruger, Basquiat, all of that. And, he's kind of doing this super academic, something that the museum, because what kicks off the film is that a museum buys one of his pieces for their permanent collection, which gives him a bunch of money to be able to go out in the country. But, it's because he's kind of doing this safe artwork, right, that he's kind of allowed to have a career.
Those abstract definitions of what is or is not acceptable as art.
Victor?
I'm in here.
What's the insane moment for today?
And so I think that's actually a really fun point for me is, subtly how she's kind of undermining his authority or like his kind of intellectual level, that he's really trying to break himself down to be a child, whereas she's sort of like, reaching this type of life of the mind that is really outside of what most people do. And I think an evolution that's like very interesting to me is her kind of learning that ecstasy is also something that you can like embody, right? And like through her acting and through that student film that she's in, that seems very like dance based. She kind of learns how to emotionally have an emotional release and find a lot of pleasure through that type of movement and that type of artistic expression, which I liked a lot. And then I think even the film, on like a bigger level, is so painterly, right? With all the colors, the lushness of upstate New York. The art, I feel like, is really rooted in this film. And I think like almost every scene could be a painting in a very accessible way. It's not meticulous, but it's really refreshing. And I think that's what stood out to me the most when I first watched it.
And the film also floats. This is it's hard to tell people to explain that it's a film that is not tied to the ground. There's a sort of elements in it that are so whimsical in a really lovely way.
Professor Rogers!
But why do you think that the film took so long to get to the public?
I mean, I think again, it definitely has to do with the fact that, there weren't a lot of people advocating for Black directors, and certainly for Black women directors. And I do think that the fact that she died so close to its release, that she couldn't really be that person advocating for the film, I think that is part of what helped it kind of languish in obscurity. But I think there's definitely a lot more movement, a lot more conversations around Black movies now, and rediscovering things too, unearthing things that maybe got lost to time. And I think for me, it was a film that actually made me feel really great when I watched it, because it made me feel reassured that a lot of the conversations that people were having around kind of representing Black life on film, that was happening 30 years ago, right? It's not, I think it's always kind of like yearning for, where's the representation of women that look like me, or stories that look like mine, or perspectives on film that seem like mine. And it's like, we don't have those, but it's like, no, we absolutely do, right? It's just that they're not celebrated in the same way that a Woody Allen film would be, right? Even though I think that she's doing what Woody Allen does, like, a lot better.
Yes, I know. A lot better, with a lot more heart.
And when it feels right, blow him away.
All right, everyone. Charles, thank you so much for chatting today. Thank you to our readers for tuning in for the past now 5 episodes. This has been a lot of fun for both Charles and I to talk about everything from Olympus Has Fallen to Losing Ground. Make sure to head over to Slog to read our accompanying essay to this video. Thank you so much for following along in this journey, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
And also, welcome to Black History Month.
Oh yeah, and happy Black History Month, 2021.